Let us reconvene. Hello, everyone. I'm Pat Parker. I am a professor of communication studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and also a co-convener of this wonderful seminar as a member of the CHCI, the Consortium of Humanities Centers and Institutes, and the network that is presenting the seminar. But for now, I am here to introduce an artist and a professor. This is Fiamma Montezemolo. She is both an artist and an anthropologist. She is she received her MFA at San Francisco Art Institute and her doctorate at the University of Oriental in Naples. Fiamma is an established scholar in border studies and professor in the Department of Cinema and Digital Media at the University of California, Davis. So my co-representative of the United States, I'm not alone here. It has felt a bit like that. I'm just, listen, I need to call you in, sister. I'm sorry. I just, for that dual, yeah. And I may be coming back to Rome with you. But anyway, Fiamma has exhibited in various institutions. Among them include Baruchello Art Foundation in Rome, the Laboratorio Arte Alameda in Mexico City, the Herbert Johnson Museum of Art, Cornell University, the Munich Jewish Museum in Germany, the National Gallery in Rome, Headlands Center for Arts in California, the ASU Art Museum. So she's quite the prolific artist, displaying her work, presenting her work, literally all over the world. Fiamma is represented by Magazzino Gallery in Rome. She's widely published as well, and she's the author of 2 monographs. One is Zapatismo, and the other is Chicanas, Politics of Representation. She's also the co-author with Renee Peralta and Heriberto Yepes, yes. And that monograph is Here is Tijuana. In 2022, she was awarded the Italian Council Minister of Culture Contemporary Art Award in collaboration with On Public and Narrow Editions, and that brought the production of her latest book, Hidden in Plain Sight. And that was published in 2024, and we have it here. This happens to be my copy, but you're welcome. There's no taking. And so today we're delighted that we will be able to screen one of your films, Reverberations of an Echo. So you'll show and discuss this film, which is set in the border between Mexico and the US. This, of course, is a very urgent topic at this point, sort of an entry point into what seems like a worsening dystopian reality in this conference on utopia. This is an ethnographic research on the afterlife and echoes of 9 artworks that have been part of the 2-decades-old public art event in Sight. So I give you the artist, the anthropologist, Fiamma Montezemolo.
Thank you so much, Pat. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, the whole CRAL crowd. Has been wonderful. I just wanted to say 2 words before you watch the film, because it's a very site-specific production, let's say. And I would say it's the less artistic and the most ethnographic of my films. This film has been commissioned for a show that was on this Biennale. So in general, you have videos in the Biennale. This video is on the Biennale. So it's already a second-order observation, let's say, that not always welcome, obviously, because it's like a critical stance or a looking at how we produce arts in certain places. So the utopia here is by the artists, by the curators, by all the people like me and like maybe you, anthropologists, that go in a place and try to work in that place. In this case, the Biennale would invite very important artists from all over the world, but especially the Americas. So we had, they invited Alfredo Jar, they invited Bodisco, they invited Javier Telles, I mean, important artists from the Americas, but also especially from Tijuana. And the gesture was to have a residency there and then produce something for the Biennale. So my question in all the years I've been in Tijuana, I lived in Tijuana for 6 years, and at the time I was an anthropologist of art, so I was really observing and also in some way consulting for the Biennale, was, but after this Biennale arrived with all their utopias, because there is a lot of, in the good and the bad, no? Utopias gesture in envisioning or dreaming of a place in a certain way. What is projection living when they live? So the question of this video is this, no? What is the echo of this narcissistic look at a place? So this is come from the Derrida's understanding of echo as something that is not reproducing what Narciso wants, no? But something that takes the last syllables of Narciso's words and makes a new message. So for me, it's the counter-utopia, maybe, this film, no? And you will see it's a 36 minutes film, so be patient. But there are 9 episodes with 9 artists that I selected. I went to study the archive, and then I did like an ethnography. So you will see the archival material and then the material that I shot. And I just interacted with what was left, with the traces that were left, right? And these traces sometimes left nothing. Or sometimes left the idea that was of the artist became the idea of the inhabitants of the district where the artist intervened. Or sometimes they really left just dystopia. Or maybe disenfranchising community that could talk for the first time about something. So there is a lot about communities, common and utopia and counter-utopia, let's call it, no? I think we can watch it and then we can discuss it together right after, okay?
Hi. Yeah, no,
That was long.
no. Just intense.
Yeah, it's very intense.
Yeah.
Even for me.
No, it's very good. Thank you so much. So now we have time for a discussion, questions. How much time do we have? You can tell me. About 20 minutes? About half hour. Okay, awesome. And so we invite questions. And I think, do we have another microphone, or we should use this one? This one is great. Okay, for questions. But I'll kick us off by asking you. You alluded to this a bit, but since our conversation in general is about utopias, I mean, how do you connect this film with questions about utopia, utopians?
Well, I think it's in the middle between utopias, imaginations, and how do you define this morning the anti-utopia? No, dystopian. The status quo. Okay, so I think it's a very powerful, not because of the film, but because of the people that made the film. In this confrontation between this narcissism and echo, I think there is a powerful dialogue, dynamic conversation that, as the artist of the terrace dolphin, marvelous dolphin that they put in the middle of the terrace, said, is a conversation. It cannot be one or the other. It's continuously one and the other. So I think it's there. And in the middle, probably there is the common, or in this case, it's more community. But there is a sense of what's possible, what can we do, what for. And I especially like the last sentences of Itzel del Canizo when she talks about the girls that self-represent themselves with the camera, which was a total disaster. Not a disaster, the film, but the results of this using of the camera, because she says everybody went back to drugs and to difficult lives, beside one that then changed her life, and she saw all her friends, not knowing about her past, saw this film in the national TV, and that's it. And she was, let's say, put on the spot, no? So it's, in that case, which was successful, became unsuccessful. No? So all this confrontation, and for me, this is the most, has been a very difficult film to be made because of the resistance that was around it, because, of course, the Biennale and the artists full of really important and good intentions that not always correspond to whatever they find on the spot, no? Which is a little bit spontaneous anthropologist, no? Like we go and we think to see maybe the anthropologists intervene less, the artists intervene more, because there is less ethical training, if you want to, or professional training, but then you leave something. And can be good or can be bad or can be both. And you have to accept it. And in my view, an artist should learn and go ahead, not just leave it behind and go ahead. No? So this was the big discussion. It was a difficult piece. Yeah.
Are there questions? Yep.
Hi, Fiamma. It's my third time seeing that, and it's just, yeah, it's incredible, and it's heavy, and it's powerful. It's kind of an obvious question to ask, but how was it received? And I mean, there's so many layers to it, right? And so many different people to receive it. So maybe first, how was it received by the people who asked you to make it? And why did they ask you? Why were you hired to do this in the first place? And then how was it received by the not the artists, but the people, in the community who are implicated?
Very different ways. So basically, this piece was made as a commission for a show in Mexico City on this Biennale. So they were remaking some pieces of this Biennale, inviting the artists of this Biennale, and I was supposed to be the only artist that was not in the Biennale doing something. So the curator asked me to propose something. And I said, I'm going to propose something, but you're not going to like it probably, because I'm going to propose to go back and see what these artists, independently from what were their intention, did, and what happened after. No, so the echoes of these messages, and she said, no. I mean, she was very happy. Then progressively, as the piece went on, I think they thought I wouldn't do the piece. But as the piece went on, basically, I needed the copyrights. Of course, they gave me the copyrights, the Biennale, because they had the archive. But then 1 week before the opening, these copyrights were not available. I mean, they were not enough anymore, and the Biennale said that each artist needed to give me the copyrights. And I said, okay, this is not going to happen. 1 week before the opening, and so it was a disaster. Of course, I didn't go to the opening, but what I did, I asked each artist the rights, they gave it to me, but Javier Telles, who is thanked for the authorization of, not of the use of his images, but not of the concept of the piece, and so I drew the piece, the parts that were in his section, are drawn. If you see, there are drawings, right? Because I didn't have the copyrights. And so I just, and then I took public images. If you see the beach performance is a public domain image, so they're bad quality. Because his justification was that he needed it was an edition, and they needed to sell it, which I understand, because artists have to survive. And so he didn't want those images to be shown and given in a public access, no? But I was like, it's a public performance, and I have to talk about your work. If I don't have your image, how am I going to do? So I have to go back and ask all the people I remember that were in the audience taking, bad images to give the image to me. But I thought it's bad, and I think it's better now. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like this impediment that work in my favor in some way, because it's more creative. So for each piece, there is a different music, there is a different creative solution, there is also an aesthetic work in choice, no? That's why it was complex. And by the community, it was well received, because we kept having a conversation. For example, the piece by Vodisco, which is really a dramatic piece, no? Because these women have been abused. They go in the public plaza, basically, and they just talk about abuse. And I remember when I was there, I was thinking, but they go back home and to work. I mean, how they do that? But did you see how she answered one of the girls? She said, they don't come to see these events, my relatives or the people I work with. This is just for you, like artwork, 3 people. Who cares? But at the same time, one of them said, but for me to public presenting my abuse, and then I went to attend therapy. So for me, it was good. So it depends, no? But then there was also one girl that was saying, I had a scar. I was chosen because of that, but it's nothing to do with abuse. I just fell when I was a child, basically, she said outside of the interview. So, what is the work of the artist? At the end, it's true that the abuse is rampant. There is a lot of abuse, as we know, no? In women's workplaces, especially maquiladoras on the border, that are very problematic. So the artist finds the strategies that he can or she can to represent this abuse. So it's a conversation, it's not a judgment, no? So I would say that the people that initially commissioned the piece didn't take it too well. But then, so we didn't show it in Mexico for years, for many years, and we presented at the Getty Center, and then it went mainly in I don't know, cultural centers, museum, but it's not a gallery piece, for example, no? It's a piece that I always present with a conversation around it, because it's a complex piece. It's not just an art piece, no?
Thank you. It was very interesting, also fascinating. I mean, all these people, this connection, also the way. Just maybe talk about temporalities. No, there is this. Most of the art is the beginning of 2000, and you did this 10 years after, And today we are 10 years after. We're talking 20 years passed from the beginning of this, many of these artists. And Tijuana was, will be. I mean, how you feel this temporality? Because today we talk about United States, border, immigrants, pushing back, etc. And there is something about this Tijuana who became symbol of something, of this idea of closed or open world, you know. And how you, who as a researcher, an artist, or sort of person, you feel this temporality where things don't go on. I mean, it's a feeling of maybe, in this sense, it's not even status quo, it's even worse. I mean, we have some feeling, I don't know, maybe, or maybe not, maybe how we can imagine something that allow us to think Tijuana as a perspective, not as a nightmare.
This Biennale, actually, this is a 20-year span, more or less, but they're still active. So we are in the 30th year. And that I appreciate, because it's a very serious Biennale. So there is a very serious reflection on the border. So I respect them and their work and their relation with temporality. There are several temporalities at work, because it's when each artist operates, there is the time of the artist being there, and there is the time of the community in that moment being there, no? And the kind of community you interact with. So, for example, the piece, the water piece, was a wonderful intention by the artist not to create a recycling water system or to recycle waters. I love the honesty of the artist, and he said basically there was no water. So, you know, how do you recycle water that is not there? So you see the temporality that basically wiped out the community from there. So it was a piece that didn't go anywhere, but still made us reflect. So I think that the US border obviously is such a symbolically and actually charged space that is difficult to give space to one temporality, because one day is like this and the other day is another thing. I happened to be there in 2001 when I started living there. And from one day to the other, I really felt that, because it was when there was the September 11, and I got trapped in Tijuana. I needed to go to San Diego to take my flight back, and the border was closed. And it's really a weird feeling to be close in a nation. I mean, I was trapped in a country, basically, because they didn't let anyone, for half day, it's like the whole history stopped, no? And I feel a little bit now we are in a similar dystopic moment, right? And so the temporalities are very overlapped, and they're very quick to change too. So, for example, in that moment, I went there because Tijuana represented in those years like the avant-garde. There was Gomez Peña. There were artists that were multiplying identity, crossing the border, making it performatic act. So it felt really the trope of hybridity in that period. As soon as September 11 arrived, a Agamben state of exception kicked in. So everything was suspended. So it was this schizophrenia is always there. And I feel today is the same.
Congratulations. I think it's an impressive piece of work. And I was wondering, I think that one of the strengths of the piece is the constellation that it constitutes, the fact that it's not only one single story, but rather a group. And I was wondering whether there were any kind of connections between the artists. They knew each other, or they met after your piece was open. And then the second question is, how did you feel that this political pressure or political context at that time after 9/11 was kind of overlapping their lives and their kind of political imaginaries of both the artists and the people of the works?
Well, let's say that first of all, some artists know each other. There is mainly the local artists know each other, as always, no? And the international artists, yes and no. Depends often on the fame too, no? If you're very famous, you don't have much time to stay and interact, no? So it depends, no? But definitely, I think they learn from each other. I think it must have been a beautiful experience too, no? To interact with all kind of artists coming from everywhere. No? I think really Insight made an amazing intervention in the space, and they contributed to put on the spot Tijuana. Them, and I don't know, maybe you're young, but Nestor Garcia Canclini, the anthropologist who is Argentinian, but he is in Mexico City. We made several interviews on the border because when I arrived, that's what I was saying, no? The hybridity concept that came from him and Homi Bhabha, he was the Latin American representative, but that was the time. After living a little bit there, after a few years, I felt we were going back to Marx. And I mean, what hybridity here? 50% of people cannot cross because of September 11. So that's what I meant when we went from hybridity to agame. No? It's like these different paradigmas going on. No? So after 20 years, I went to interview Canclini in Mexico City, telling him, I don't agree with you. I mean, I love the idea of hybridity, and I feel that we should multiply identity, cross, and go back and forth, but it's not working. And it's a beautiful interview because I'll send you the interview, but I mean, he answers very well. He says it's not it's a description of a process, it's not a result. That's the difference, okay? And then I ask him, this idea of the artist intervening in a space, what for? What are we doing that for? And he says, because the artist is not in charge of the political system. The artist is in charge of the symbolic, of the imagination. Take care of it, the imagination, and then we will see. This is why the social art sometimes has certain shortcomings, because it wants to take the place of the politician sometimes, and it doesn't really work. So this conversation in Tijuana has been very strong and going on for years now. And the constellation is my concept is that there is like this astronaut that is formed by all the artists and connected, and then there is this aura for each artwork, and then at the end, if you see, it's spread out. There is no connection between them, and each one goes in another direction. And what takes place in the last image is not the artist's work, but the result of the artist's work. No. So, for example, there was the terrace at the beginning, and then at the end there is the dolphin, which I love, by the way. That's so kitsch. I mean, it killed completely the project. Andres, you want to?
Thank you, Fiamma. Well, thank you very much for the film. You just touched, actually, on the question I wanted to ask you, not to give a complete answer, but you just touched on that. And I'll start a bit before. It's this relation between utopia, which is meant to create an alternative place, sort of a no place that gives place, and the statu quo that was mentioning Catherine before, and now you, the failure to make place for an alternative experience. I mean, to dar lugar a eso que no tiene lugar. So now you touch the difference between symbolic imagination and political program just now. And I was wondering, I mean, if that failure has something to, this is a real question, I'm not doing a rhetorical question, so I don't have an answer. I was wondering if this has something to do with the ways art behaves, in the sense that at one extreme you have that, I mean, art is experienced in many ways. So at one extreme you have something like somatic impact, just the way you are connected emotionally to a form or to a whatever rhythm. That's very clear in music. I mean, people sometimes, like even in the street, listen explicitly to music because they want to feel. They might not even know what they are feeling, but you listen to music and you get, and that's contagious. It's something that's contagious, certain rhythm and an emotion, etc. And it's weird because even if their emotions are very ambiguous and they are very non-discrete, they train you and they create a habit and they make you behave in a certain way. I mean, it's like Shakespeare, they're like people that listen to music become good people. Never trust someone that doesn't listen to music. Yeah, and the other extreme you have like something like the conceptual message of a work of art. That it's often explicit, even sometimes programmatic, not necessarily, but it might not work as the rhythm. It might not be contagious. It was more something that you're going to understand, even if it's a performance, as many of the works of art were here, in which you get involved. But it didn't have the kind of enough sustainability in time to create a habit, but it was rather that something you would understand, and you could replace programmatically very quickly. I mean, you could be very convinced, but the next day you could forget them completely. Yeah. So I was wondering, I mean, has this something to do with the fact that maybe art, I mean, intervenes in a space, intervenes in a situation in a very programmatic, strong way, but sometimes it doesn't create the habit, the sensible habit, in bodies, in somatic behavior, to change things?
It's a very good question. There are two levels. I think the first level is the one which has nothing to do with the artist, but with the curators. Because, attention, the curator is the intermediary, okay? I'm not very fond of curators. I don't know other artists what they think in general, with all the respect for the curators, because, sorry, not all of them, but many, because this intermediation sometimes doesn't work. Because of this also problem, because many curators, when I was there, were coming to the border to look for the Rousseauian subject that had the talent, but not the means. And they were coming with those means to make come out this natural creativity that would disrupt the world, okay, in a good way. But that was the curator project often, not the artist project. And so, for example, there were artists that were there, that were in the board, that were talking about, I don't know, painting families, and nothing to do with the border issue that was very fashionable at the time, and they were systematically excluded. So it's not just a matter of creating a habit, sensation, and what is there. It's also who mediates this message, and who brings you to the museum, and who brings you to the eyes of the audience. You understand what I mean? So there is a multiplication of problems. The intermediary, who is the final audience, and then and the artist is just a part of that assemblage. And then the second part is the art you're talking about. There are two different kinds of level of arts. That's why, for example, I'm not a social artist, and I should be because I'm an anthropologist. All the curators ask me this question. Why don't you do social art? You're an anthropologist, it's perfect, right? No, because I'm an anthropologist, I don't want to do social art, because it doesn't work, because it doesn't create an habit, because it doesn't help. What I can do as an artist probably is to leave you with something that is moving, which doesn't mean, I'm not in this, even though I love Deleuze, I think that art is also conceptual, very strongly conceptual. So I want to move you at every level, emotionally and conceptually, right? But that social art doesn't do that often. It's bad anthropology. So that's the problem there.
Yeah, we should probably, unless there's somebody with a burning question or comment. Okay, one more, and then we'll stop.
Thank you for the film. Very impressive. It's very good. See the work of artists and all together and distance. It's very different, and I was wondering about how works the eruption of the imagination in the artist and the work of context. Is complementary or is opposite? How do you understand the work of the eruption like utopic meaning?
Yeah, so I think sometimes, as I have a training as an anthropologist, and then I arrived to the arts because I was feeling that anthropology had a huge limit, in the sense that I wanted to intervene with the imagination, and that was not allowed in academia. I mean, theoretically, you have to stop at the representational moment, right? You're not supposed to go and change the word, and you're not supposed also to imagine it in your own terms, right? So for me, that was a limit. And this is when I passed through from being an anthropologist to being an artist, if you want to. But at the same time, I bring with me that ethnographic background, which doesn't allow me just to go on the sensation, on just I mean, I envy artists that don't know anything about certain context and they can come out with a piece which is amazing. You know? So, for example, the work that you were, Marta, was showing, super powerful. It's fantastic. You like it or not, it's super powerful. I would immediately have the second thing, oh my God, the feminists would think that. The other, you know, I would think about the context. The artist just made the piece. And sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's also good, you know? So it's problematic. It's both. Yes, yeah, it depends. The contextual, I would say, yeah. Thank you very much.
So I think we have to end now. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
So we'll just take like a 10-minute coffee break, and then we'll move on to the next panel. And less. I'm going to introduce everybody, and I just realized, Julien, I only have your bio in French. So I'll read it in French, and then I'll just do a little translation, unless, yeah, you don't have one in English handy, do you? It's okay, I'll figure it out. Yeah, okay, so welcome. Thank you. Welcome to our last session for the day. With Julien Belair, who is joining us by Zoom, with Judith Carrera, and with Andres Claro. And I will just introduce people, and then we'll get started. So I'm reading Julien's bio in French. Julien Belair est architecte, président d'honneur et fondateur du 6B. Le 6B est un tiers-lieu de 7000 mètres carrés à Saint-Denis, espace de travail de plus de 300 personnes, de rencontres et d'expérimentation. Ce tiers-lieu questionne la notion d'équipement public et le modèle du lieu culturel. Spécialiste en conception collaborative et en construction participative, Julien Belair est architecte depuis 2005 et adopte une démarche alternative et prospective afin de redonner à l'architecture son pouvoir fédérateur et de placer l'habitant au cœur de la construction de la cité. Membre du collectif EHESS depuis 2003, il construit des architectures éphémères et festives en s'appropriant des espaces délaissés dans différentes villes européennes. Julien Belair est également cofondateur de l'association AOA. Il mène un travail sur le continent africain afin de favoriser l'échange de savoir-faire constructif entre le Nord et le Sud. Okay, Judith Carrera. And sorry, I forget, j'ai pas donné le titre. Julien's talk is Quelle architecture pour les communs? What architecture for the commons? Judith Carrera, whose talk is called Public Space and Democracy, the Role of Architecture and the Arts. Judith is director of the Centre de Cultura Contemporánea de Barcelona. Thank you. Carrera graduated in political science at the Universitat Autónoma de Barcelona and earned an advanced studies diploma at the Institut d'études politiques Sciences Po in Paris. In Paris, she worked in the Analysis and Prospection Office of UNESCO, and before directing the CCCB, she was the driving force and head of the center's Thought and Debate program. With over 25 years of experience in the field of culture and international relations, she has promoted European projects and collaborated with institutions such as the Centre Pompidou in Paris, the Haus der Kulturen der Welt in Berlin, the Open Society Foundation, the Rolex Foundation, the British Academy, the London School of Economics, the European Time to Talk Network, the Collège d'études mondiales in Paris, the BSc, ICREA, and the PEN Català. She has lectured broadly and is a regular contributor to the media and a member of literary juries and the boards of various academic and cultural institutions internationally. In 2022, she won the Diffusion Award of the Setmana de Libre en Català. Oh, that's quite Spanish. And was named Chevalier des Arts et des Lettres by the French Ministry of Culture. Congratulations. Lastly, Andres Claro, whose talk is Figures of Utopia, Poetic Topologies, Communal... that didn't get corrected. Poetic Tropologies. Yeah, it didn't get corrected here. Poetic Tropologies, Communal Topologies. Andres is an essayist, born in Santiago de Chile in 1968, is an essayist and university professor. He teaches in the doctorate in philosophy, in parentheses, aesthetics, at the Universidad de Chile, and has been visiting professor in universities in Europe, Latin America, and the United States. He undertook his postgraduate studies in philosophy and literature at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, Paris, where he worked under the direction of Jacques Derrida, and at Oxford University, where he completed a Doctor of Philosophy in Literature. To a series of essays on poetics, Theory of Language and Culture, most recently the trilogy of books La Creación, 2014, Imágenes de Mundo, 2016, and Tiempo Sin Fin, 2018. He adds 2 major books, La Inquisición y la Cábala, I'm sorry, I'm butchering this, un capítulo de la diferencia, it's okay, entre ontología e exilio, the Inquisition and the Kabbalah, a chapter on the difference between ontology and exile from 1996. And I'm just going to say the next one in English. Broken Vessels, 4 variations on the translator's task in 2012. He has published collections of poems and literary translations from various languages. He divides his work between Paris and Santiago, combining research, teaching, and writing. So welcome to the panel. And Julien is going to go first, I think in French. Français ou en anglais?
I think I will have to try it in English.
Okay. Yeah, if you can't, si vous n'arrivez pas, on va vous aider ou vous pouvez le faire en français.
Yeah, if there is some words I couldn't find, I will tell them in French.
Okay.
How long do I have?
A half hour, up to a half hour. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. So thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Catherine, for the presentation of my last years. So you understood I'm an architect. I call you from Antsiranana, which is a city north of Madagascar. I'm here for the last few months, and I'm in the area in Mayotte Island for the last 6 years. So before I was working near Paris, most of the time in Saint-Denis, that I think you will visit tomorrow, this place which is called the 6B. I will give you a few words and images on the 6B just later. I will share my screen. I have many photos, so I think I will go with them very fast, very quickly. So if you feel sick, just tell me, and I will skip some photos. But first, I would say that as an architect, you can understand that I try to work from utopia to reality. The idea is to materialize the common in building, in the city, in objects that people could use in everyday life. And as you will see, I like to work in very different contexts for different reasons, and also to get feed and to try to find not to do always the same things. So let's say first, especially in France, the common should be mainly a public prerogative in France, like for the health, for the education, cultural, money. Most of the common should come from the public system. But like everywhere in the world, we can notice that states and governments perhaps don't manage to bring the common that we need. So we have different way. Me as an architect, sometimes I work with the public sector, like cities, states, governments. Sometimes I work with private companies, associations. Sometimes I work with experts, like other architects, landscape designers, anthropologists, artists. I would call them all experts. And sometimes I work with the users, the final users. So I will present you a few projects that I did in the last 20 or 10, 15 years in those 4 categories. So I will begin to present you a few projects that I did with the public sector, mainly, let's say, cities and, yeah, let's say the commune, la commune. So the first projects I would show you is Place de la Bastille in Paris, where you meet all of you. So this was an aerial view of the past Bastille Place. It was a common space for cars, and Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, thought it would be nice to have a common space for people, for pedestrians, for nature, and also for tourists, so they could get closer to this monument in the center of the public space. So this was really a gray space, and very near we have this marvelous harbor, the Arsenal, which was a quiet nature. And so one of the ideas was to connect those two contexts. So the mayor wanted, they did 7 public spaces at the same time in order to try to transform the way public space in Paris. And this was one of those. And we made a collective of different professionals, artists, in order to design and to co-construct the project. We would call it Collective Bastille. And so we worked on really many themes, like the history, the ancient, the prison of the Bastille, which was there. And then we made lots of ateliers with people, either school, people, kids from the school, either people from the hospital just near, or from the opera, from the harbor, all the people taking care of the restaurants, and all. So we did all of those atelier meetings for 2 years in order to reveal the needs and to try to design something that would be a common wish. And so after this work, we began to materialize. So we made drawings on the ground. We made temporary furnitures. We made events. And after that, the project could be adjusted and designed. And now the work is done. So of course, there was a big landscape issue, blue and green corridors. And it's a very historical place where all the wood in Paris was coming from there. So we wanted to work with wood. So this was a participative building time with neighbors, with artists, with carpenters from all over the city. And then it was a way to experiment uses in order to establish the future design of the place. Also with symbols. And so that's the final project that you could see when you pass near. Then a second project that was in 2016 was also a wish from the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo. Usually it's prerogative of the government to host migrants, but because the government didn't do it and people were sleeping on the sidewalk, the mayor of Paris decided to do something. So she called me and we made a big team. It was a kind of emergency project. We had to build that place in 2 months in order to host 500 people every night. So the idea was that the people arriving in Paris on a migration status could rest for a time before going in administrative things or continuing their work. So it was a moment where there was many people arriving in France, in Paris, all over Europe, still nowadays. and people were destabilizing the public space in Paris. So that's why the mayor thought they had to do something, and that's why also all the inhabitants were wanted to do something. So they found this empty building, which was belonging to SNCF train company, and we decided to make a temporary project because this building was just available for 2 years. So we had to build something in 2 months, lasting for 2 years. And the idea was that 2 years after, we would dismantle it and build it again in another place. But 2 years after, or 3 years after, the government changed, and then you don't want to have this kind of projects anymore. So this was all the people involved in the design process. So because we had to be so quick, I had to bring together many skills instead of inventing everything myself. So we had three points. First, to host people, then health place, and then housing place. And so I worked with Hans-Walter Müller to make this big bubble that was inflated in 2 hours. So that we had to design and to build it before. So it was a kind also of symbol that we didn't want to make something sad, and we thought that the ability of the city to host new programs and to evolve, to mutate in order to respond to the needs, and that needs was to host people, could be festive, could be joyful, and has not always to be something very sad in the suburbs, hidden very far in the city. So that was this insufflated building, but also it was a new in the regulation. It was not possible to have this kind of program in an insufflated building, but because there was this will, it was possible to do differently. So it's always also, I think, an opportunity to develop new architectural techniques. This was a health place made with containers, transformed containers, and then the housing place was made of 7 neighborhoods with different colors. And in France, we are not supposed to say that people, to put all the people with the same language or origin together, because we always think that French should be all the same and we should all be in the common. But actually, because people didn't speak French, people were so destabilized because they came from so far and they are very different. If you speak about Afghans or people from Somali or from Senegal or from Yemen, it's not at all the same culture and the same language. So we did neighborhoods for different cultures. And it was temporary. So again, it was an opportunity to express other architectural references and techniques. So we used wooden prefabricated to make all the rooms. And so you can see the colors of the different neighborhoods. A room was for 4 people. And then we used the scaffolding to make all the common spaces to eat, to watch TV, to make sport, to have a lounge. And this was very practical because very easy to build and to unbuild. So again, it was an opportunity to express other imaginary and other architectural techniques, also in order to be quick and to be environmental, not to have to make too much carbon. So we had the laundry, sports, cinema, and the idea is to make the best we can, even if we have little time and not so much money. So that was another way of trying to make common sense in the city and a place to host. This project was in Sainte-Geneviève-des-Bois. It was also a city who came to see me and said, we have this old swimming pool. We don't know what to do with it. We just built a new, very modern swimming pool, and we don't know, but we learned to swim in that pool, and so we don't want to demolish it. And they came to see me in the 6B, and as you will discover, they were interested in that way of doing a shared working space. And so they said, perhaps we could do something. And so I want to speak about the process again, because I think the process and to take time is very important in all the phases of the project. If we need if we want to reveal the common, so we need to take time. We don't need to go fast with only experts. We have to share the design time. So that was all those meetings with models and to think about what it could be on programs, in the space, how it could be transformed. And when you put all the people together and you bring references, etc., you find a project that all the people want. And that I think it's a way to reveal a common necessity and then a response to valorize and to emphasize the common. So that was on the top, it was the old swimming pool, and on the bottom, it's a new swimming pool, all with wood. So then that the program was made, the idea was to bring all the people together, so to have a business plan and to make this advertising to all the people, association, little companies, sports people who wants to come. And after 2 months, everyone wanted to come, and so we began the building time, and 2 years after it was made. So here you can see a few photos of this old swimming pool, which now is a place where there are concerts, where there are parties, where there are sport events, where the people work together, artists, association, and it's a way of revealing common and bring all the initiatives of the civil society in the city. They couldn't find another place, and in this kind of space, they could work, reveal, show. And so I think this kind of public equipment is great for the future, especially because it's also reusing an old building, and we don't need always to demolish and to build new things. This project is a bit similar, but it was an old tribunal law court. Here we are in Mayotte, and so the idea was to reuse it and to bring life into it and to find a good program. So it's about co-working, it's about formation, it's about conviviality and cultural events like exhibitions. So we had a bit the same process to find the program, and then we with the city we decided to do the work. And another thing is the environmental issue. So we think all together that we should be a bit more careful on the environmental impact. So we chose to make carpentry out of bamboos, which grow in Mayotte and are not used. So we designed a kind of contemporary structure out of bamboo because people in Mayotte think it's a material of the past, and we think it's a material of the future. So we designed a bamboo structure which is now built, and the place should be open in 2 months from now, hosting what we call now tiers-lieux. Wait, just I check the time. Okay, so I won't show this last project. It was a bit the same, reuse of an old building to make a cultural place in Mayotte. Then I would show you comments made by companies or by the private sector. The first of it is this one. It's what we call in French habitat participatif, participative housing. So it was a builder who had the possibility to build 25 apartments building. And so instead of building and then finding the people who would live in it, he thought it could be nice to find another way and to make a participative project. So those were the first inhabitants. At the end, half of them didn't inhabit because it took 3 years to begin the project. So half of the people had another life, and half of them are now inhabiting in the project. So many meetings. Sometimes also we need to sweat and to be on a building time in order to share and to reveal the words. And so we have, of course, different ways of finding the needs of everyone, and then making models, speaking about bioclimatic aspects. And then that was the project that we all designed together. For sure, I wouldn't have designed that, but with all those discussions and this future inhabitant, we decided to build these 4 stories or 5 stories building out of wood only. It was one of the first building out of wood in Paris area that was made 6 years ago, just near the Olympic site. And so also it's about the individual space, but also the common space in a housing building. So we developed like 600 square meters of common spaces, like kitchen, place to make the birthdays, the terrace, the rooftop, laundry. There is one apartment belonging to everyone, so not everyone has one room more to host family, but everyone could use this apartment 15 days a year. So there was a lot of common programs that was possible because the future inhabitants chose it, but the company who's building couldn't choose because it doesn't know if the future inhabitants want to have those common spaces. Okay, this is another housing program, but it's now in Mayotte. I will show it very quickly. It's about transforming slums into a more decent city. And so it's a first operation of housing in order to transform the shanty town. And we are doing this kind of houses made of bamboo and soil. So we try to use local materials in order to diminish the environmental impact, but also to make local economies. So that's also really important, is to try to keep the value on the territory and not to send the money on the on the other side of the world. But when you build something somewhere, it's nice that people from around can benefit of the economy of the project. This is a project for an association, Emmaüs Solidarité. I just want to show you it very quickly because this is what we call in France Plan Grand Froid. Every October, people discover that winter is coming and that some people are living in the streets. And so they say, oh, we should host those poor people. So it would be better to do it before, but okay, so it's kind of emergency every year. And so this time we did this kind of architecture. That's why I wanted to show it to you because there is no new material. It's tents belonging to Croix Rouge that they landed. So we could transform this big hangar, this big hall into housing place and common spaces with very, very little money. So sometimes it's not about building or kind of making architecture. Okay, I'll try to be very quick. Okay, first this one. This kind of project, I think you all have images of this kind of projects. It's a north-south exchange with students because I'm teaching in architecture school. And so we made this house in a village in North Cameroon for the women because it's a Muslim place and women are hidden. And so we made this place so they can meet and bring economy together and sew and having a development process. So we designed and built everything in 2 months with local materials, with local people, and with students. So as you understood, there is no states at this time. It's very experts, I would say, like architecture students, architects, landscape designer, and local people who really know how to do it. That come together to serve those women in that case. Then another kind of project is this one that we call Ambassade du Pérou. Near Paris, we have also too many shantytown slums. And so the people who live in those places usually are Rome people from Romania or Bulgaria, and they're very poor. And so in one of this neighborhood, we decided to make a common space for Christmas. And also it was a chapel at the end, and a place to make music and to have parties and just a common space in the neighborhood. But because when you are in these slums, you have a very little house and you don't have common spaces in your house. And at the end, of course, it was a place to make homeworks with the kids and possibility for associations to come and to exchange with those inhabitants. Then, as Catherine's exposed in the beginning for a bit more than 10 years, I was part of this collective, which doesn't exist anymore. And it was many architects and many different other skills. And it was a kind of utopia and reality. And we made many projects in arts festivals around the world. And so this was investigating a place near the Parc de la Villette in Paris. We call it Le Rab, and every day people who could come with the rest of the food, and we would make a big meal for everyone. This was in Barcelona, in Emetre Festival in 2005, and we built scaffolding building, and we organized this rocket that Jean Nouvel just built at the end of the street, and we organized le décollage, going in the sky. So we would live there, and then there was this big event and big party with the rocket going in the sky. Then we invested the French pavilion in Venezia 2006, and the idea was to inhabit the pavilion, and so the visitors would have an experience of visiting someone and being hosted instead of just seeing images or movies or pictures. Patrick Bouchin was the curator, and he invited our collective to transform the pavilion, to live in the pavilion. And also, it's always for us an opportunity to make art experimentation and to have health benefits. We made a sauna, we made a little swimming pool. This is another project in Latvia in 2007, and the idea was to bring something lively in this poor neighborhood. And so we worked with the mushroom. So we grew up mushrooms, we did mush roof, we did mush boom, many projects like that. I would stop exist because I think you understood a bit this kind of projects, and I will finish with just those 3 projects, which will be quickly presented. And those projects are initiated from users. The first type of project is kind of agricole projects, because this was very the case. It's classical in France that agriculture's people who needs to have the same machine, who need to buy seeds together. So we have this cooperative for a long time movement in the rural area. And so this is vanilla producers in Mayotte who went together and asked me to make a place to transform the vanilla. So as you understood, I responded to other needs, and also I tried to have a positive economical on local people, and also to use eco-friendly materials like bamboo, like mud, soil, and so these projects, I think there is this kind of projects all over the territory. Then we have another type of projects I showed you a bit before, but what I call the slums or shantytown, I don't really know the name in English, but those places are common. People build them themselves together, and they manage it afterwards. So this slum was in Saint-Denis. It was the oldest slum in France, and I worked with those people on different issues because one day they were demolished by the police. So I worked with them for almost 10 years. What we did was to bring toilets because there was no sanitaries. So we made dry toilets at the entrance of the camp. And so this was made also with architectural students, but mainly with the people from this neighborhood, I would say. So those dry toilets, they were shown on the TV, saying those poor people are more ecological than you. So it was kind of fun. Then we made common spaces, like places to make the homework, places to share. We brought caravans, and we gave them to the people. Then after it was demolished, and so we worked with all the families to host them on new places. And so they were in different places, and the idea was that in all the different places on which they would stay between 6 months and 2 years, it would be more developed and more developed. So first we noticed that it was a too many people together, and they didn't want to be all together. So we divided the group, and then on the second land we work on the families, and we noticed that big families should have bigger houses and not the stronger guy. And so at the end, we did this neighborhood in which they stayed for 10 years. And it was all auto-constructed, and people would live happily in that neighborhood in which the houses did cost less than 3,000 euros. And then the last one, I'll be very quick because it's better to see it on live, but you will see tomorrow, the 6B, and Fred and Benjamin will host you. So this was an opportunity. I was leaving this neighborhood, and this building was empty. I knew people who needed spaces. And so I organized the legal occupation of the space. And after 3 months, we noticed that mainly of the people who came in that building were working in cultural practices. So the identity of the place went up. And so now it's considered like a cultural place, a co-working place, a public space, a place for cultural events, exhibition, and parties also, because we try to break all the boundaries. And so we have hip-hop events, we have Romanians events, we have contemporary art events, and we try to mutate with the mutation of the neighborhood. We try to not to be in a gentrification process, but to work with the people who were living in the neighborhood before, and with the people who are living in the neighborhood now, and with the people who will live in the neighborhood in the future. We think that urban development can be positive for everyone. Voilà pour ma petite intervention. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Julien. Okay, Judith, you're up.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. No. Should I restart or? Maybe just tell us, yeah. Okay. Well, I chose to speak about the notion of public space based on my own intellectual and practical experience as director of the CCCB, which is a multidisciplinary cultural space in Barcelona devoted to promote critical debate around cities and other key aspects of contemporary societies. The notion of public space obviously relates to the concept of public sphere, inscribed in a very long philosophical tradition that goes back to Plato and Aristotle, but that finds one of its peak moments in the 20th century with the Frankfurt School and the critical theory, with Hannah Arendt, with Habermas, and more recently with Richard Sennett and other intellectuals. Then this notion of public sphere, as you all know, understood as a shared intellectual space for debate and discussion that reinforces democracy, translates, on my view and lens, in the urban public space, the material shared spaces in our cities. So if I argue that urban public spaces are also important, it's precisely because they relate and materialize the political principles that are embedded in the democratic public sphere, such as free speech and free movement, equality of access, and pluralism understood as the peaceful coexistence between strangers. So public spaces are the spaces of the common in our cities, and they are both material and immaterial spaces. And we're talking about squares, streets, water and riverfronts, train stations, memorials and monuments, public food markets, peripheries, those connecting points in the cities that allow, create and sediment the common. And inspired by the French urbanist Françoise Choët and her distinction between urbs and civitas, it is the idea that the form of cities institutes a kind of citizenship. In other words, that architecture is key for the common, as the form of the city matters and conditions the quality of our democracies. My argument in this presentation is that cultural institutions, cultural spaces such as museums, art centers, theaters, cinemas, and alike, are and can become key public spaces in both of the senses, as architectural artifacts, as buildings and urban public space within the city grids that create urbanity, a meeting place between strangers that promotes the sense of a common shared space, as well as a space of recognition and community building. In that sense, the form of a cultural center are also important. They have to be open, crossable, porous, versatile, flexible, and physically connected to the city. The second side of the dimension of public space as the cultural centers as public spaces is of course, their artistic and intellectual program that they promote, that should be guided by those political values that I just mentioned in the public sphere, such as free speech, equality of access, and pluralism. So I'm going to explain the way in which we try to implement those principles in our daily program and action at the CCCB, which is the acronym for the Center of Contemporary Culture of Barcelona. The CCCB is a space for public debate that through big thematic exhibitions, discussions and symposia, and cinema festivals and programs. So our main principle, the first principle is free speech. That means that we try to avoid any kind of censorship, and we always try to enlarge the limits of what can be said and discussed in our public sphere. We also try to increase the number and diversity of voices that are allowed to be heard and who is able to speak. We try to improve and enrich the quality of public conversation, and we try to become a bridge between disciplines, a bridge between generations, a bridge between geographies, between cultures, and thus becoming a space of freedom and a space of translation. Free speech, in our case, has also a correlation with freedom of movement. If we can freely speak, we should also be able to circulate freely. That means that we try to avoid to have barriers in our physical center, to have become a physically open space, free access as much as we can, and full accessibility. The second principle that guides our daily work to become a real public sphere is equality of access. That means that the idea of becoming a space open to everyone, regardless of the previous background of the people who are wanting to access. We also understand that equality of access creates a performative access. So the fact that we open up our work to as many people as possible also creates equality. So we understand access and equality not only as a name, but as a mean of creating equality. And the third principle that guides our work is the idea of pluralism. So the idea that through our programs, we try to include as much as diversity our own city embeds. We want to become not only a motor of our city, but also a mirror of the city that we want to represent. A city, in this case, Barcelona, that in the past 10, 15 years went from 2% of foreign-born population to the current 30% of foreign-born population. as a public cultural institution, we try to represent as much as we can this diversity in our own programs, in our own teams, and in our own audiences. So to reinforce these principles of equality of access and of pluralism, in the past few years, we have created a new program that we called Mediation that allows us to promote those two values. This mediation program includes basically two main projects. One has to do with education. At least in Barcelona and in Spain in general, educational and cultural spaces were kind of very divided and separated. And we decided that it was very important in terms of expanding the equality of access to work very closely with the educational system, not only because we believe that education is a kind of very needed tool to share to achieve the democratic values of embedded in the cultural world, but also because it allows us to reach to future audiences, especially the digital-born audiences, so younger audiences, because education always also allows us to be more rooted in our city. So it creates a lot of kind of proximity connection with our programs, and also because it allows us to engage larger communities through schools, through universities. We also reach the communities of teachers, families, and educational policy makers. I would like to give an example of this work that we do. We started a very interesting project of critical thinking with teenagers, with youngsters, that is very popular today. This is a project that we started some years ago in order to promote critical thinking among teenagers, and that we started with the high school that is next to our center, and then it became so popular that many different high schools in the city of Barcelona wanted to attend. So by doing reaching these different schools of the city, we not only promote critical thinking within youngsters and teenagers, but we also create a bridge between different schools of different social and economic backgrounds of the city, from the poorest areas of town with the more the richest part of town. So it's a way of creating city by through culture and through education. The other aspect of this new program of mediation has to do with what is specifically called mediation, which has to do with community-based projects. We had the impression that the CCB, which is it's a 30 years old project, was very good at creating public debate with the best intellectuals of the world, dealing with the most important topics of the public space, and we were already dealing with concern with the utopian thinking, also with the extreme right rise and the rise of authoritarianism, and we had this impression of being always dealing with the already convinced audiences, no? And our concern was how to expand the reach of our project. So we decided to kind of open up a series of projects that could allow us to not only speak and discuss about the intellectual concerns about extreme right, but also like do a more hands-off or hands-on projects working directly with the political and social scars in our own city. So we started projects like working with non-accompanied migrants, young migrants in the city of Barcelona through cultural language. So we worked with NGO, for instance, in our neighborhood, or working with, hosting these non-accompanied young migrants in our cities, with, as you know, are the kind of the black beast of the extreme right movement also in our countries. So we offered our spaces, our languages, our artists, our networks of intellectuals, of writers, of poets, to work together with this NGO and work together with those youngsters in order to also not only expand and become a more inclusive and more accessible space, but also to transform our own space. No, it's not only that we were working for them, it's that we were expecting that they would change and make our institution better. Another project that we did in that regard is a project that we call the School of Residence. The CCCB is located in one of the most complex neighborhoods in town. It's called El Raval. And El Raval is it's a neighborhood that has traditionally been the door of entrance of immigration in Barcelona, because it's traditionally, symbolically seen as the door of entrance of immigration to Barcelona, because it's next to the port of Barcelona. And this is a neighborhood that went from 2% of foreign-born population to 55% foreign-born population in just 15 years. So it's been a very quick and very dramatic change in just a decade. And it's today still one of the most diverse, complex, and kind of edgy neighborhood. That it's very interesting for us in terms of a center that is devoted to cities and public space being rooted in that particular area. But our aim was how to be committed and locally rooted regarding to that neighborhood. So we created this project called School of Residence, in which one of the high schools next door of our center would do their physical classes at the CCCB 3 times a week. So we have these highly segregated high schools next door that were kind of becoming part of our center. They come to our center 3 times a week. And they do their classes, but we also intervene in their curriculums. It's not that they're doing their normal classes at the CCCB, but we fit their programs with our network of intellectuals, artists, writers, filmmakers that participate in our programs. So it's a way of opening up the doors to those youngsters, those families, and making our institution more hospitable, not to enlarging the notion of the commons, and trying to make our public sphere and public space more robust through the language of culture. Again, this project is about the CCB being connected and committed to that environment and that particular context, but is a way of this project and this community transforming ourselves and our own gaze towards those, transforming and making our institution a better place and a more inclusive place. This mediation program is about inventing new projects, inventing new formats, mixing people or creating a meeting space for people that have never met before. So kind of enlarging our imagination. No? We were talking about imagination before. For us, what I'm trying to say and to also to conclude is that cultural institutions, and this is in our case, are not only architectural artifacts, material spaces of urbanity, spaces for meeting, for community building, spaces of recognition of the others, which is, I think, increasingly important in the current context of digital bubbles, but are foremost spaces of imagination, which, according to Hannah Arendt, is the first political faculty as it activates a desire full of future. So in the current dystopian moment, or a status quo moment, and in response to uncertainty and political and climate apocalypse, disinformation, which basically are based on the denial of future, I think cultural spaces and institutions have the duty and the possibility not only to promote discussion about architecture and the form of the cities, but also becoming a public space per se, a space of meeting of mixing peoples and users, and being extremely locally rooted. No? For me, the transformative potentiality of utopia should or might take place primarily in the local scene. And not only through this physical, to becoming this physical space, but also promoting imagination through culture and the arts, which are languages that are used to inventing futures. No, when we talk about literary cinema, theater, or fiction in general, these are languages that are used and are precursors of inventing possible futures. No, so I think that in this dystopian moment, cultural spaces are not only a potential space for reinforcing the commons, but also of potential imagination, no, to create another possible future. So this is basically what I wanted to say, and I also brought some pictures of our space so that maybe I can show you so that you see this theoretical approach to more practical images. For those of you who are not familiar with the center, I'll try to find the archive. I think she made it here, the video. It's here, yeah. No, it's one.
I think they have to. Yeah, I think we have to call.
Yeah, okay. Ah.
She will.
Ah.
Have to do something there. Yeah, but she will do it. She'll come. She told us to ask her.
Sorry. Non, j'ai trouvé, mais par contre, c'est pas projeté parce qu'il y a...
Il faut le partager dans la visio.
Ah.
Sinon, la personne qui est en visio, elle ne peut pas le voir.
Ah.
Alors, hop là, la visio, elle est là. Hop là. Juste partager l'écran. Comme ça, la personne qui est en visio, elle va aussi voir ce que vous projetez. Voilà, impeccable. Voilà.
Ah, merci. Et comment... par là, non? C'est par là.
You just move it like that.
Ah, ok. Is this okay? Okay.
Voilà.
Est-ce que Julien peut voir? Ah. Okay, so this is our place for those of you who have never come or been at the CCCB. This is the space of the center, which is located in a former 19th century hospice, an orphanage that was an orphanage until the mid-1950s, and then it was abandoned after the Spanish Civil War because the nuns, the orphanage belonged to the church, the Catholic Church, and the nuns considered that the neighborhood was not safe enough for the children that were part of the building. So the building was completely abandoned for 30 years, and then when democracy came back to Spain, the city council at that time decided that they would reconvert that former orphanage into a cultural center. So that's the building. Basically, the building on the right side, you can see that it was kept as its original form, and then the only side of the building that was demolished was reconverted into that kind of mirror of the city. So this is the connection of the, you see the building is the square building that is very well integrated into the urban grid. As I said, this is, I think it's a very important phenomenon, and we can see that a lot of museums and cultural institutions that are not, that have a building that is not very well connected to the city, they have problems to kind of connect to their audiences. So it's a square that it's crossable. So you can this building on the left, on the right side is the public University of Barcelona. Yeah, this.
No, it's perfect. We're seeing it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So as you can see, we are part of a very dense neighborhood, which is called El Raval, as I mentioned. Well, this is the place where we are. This is part of our reflection about public space. We have a permanent observatory of European cities since the year 2000. Every 2 years, we organize a European Prize for Public Space, which basically gathers the best public space works in all European cities, and it allows us to create a public discussion about what public space is and should be based on real works that have been developed in European cities. These are part of our publications that have to do with cities in many different aspects, more practical, more architectural, and also more theoretical. This is our architecture jury for this prize. This is one example of our exhibitions. Our exhibitions are our structural program. We organize 3 to 4 exhibitions a year based on topics that we decide every year. We currently just opened a big exhibition on the Amazon, on the tropical forest. This is an exhibition that we organized on Pasolini's Rome. So again, this idea that cities are not only physical spaces, but symbolic spaces and imaginary spaces. So we usually use literary references or film references to talk about cities. Well, these are just random images that I chose for you to see a bit the spirit of the place. We, of course, reflect a lot about technological, digital, critical reflect upon the technological and critical devices. This is Angela Davis in our spaces. This is part of our public discussions. Well, these are our classrooms. Is the Ideas Biennale that we organize together with the City Council of Barcelona every 2 years in our public spaces. So again, it's always this idea of openness and being part of the city, not only as a physical space, but also as this immaterial space. This is a debate that we organize around Moroccan authors, Adam Zagajewski, the Polish poets. This is part of our program with teenagers that I mentioned. You can see it's very crowded. And it's a very important program for us because, as I said, is kind of trying to create community and bridges between different neighborhoods in town that never get together. So even only the fact that they see each other, we find that this idea of recognizing each other, of seeing each other, not at least to know that there's another one, there's another, to avoid the ghettoization of the city. This is Gaël Faye, the Rwandan-based writer. I think he's based now in Paris. He came to this project. This is our School of Residence. So we are doing these big, very intellectual exhibitions that we open up to youngsters and people from different origins. Well, the kids is always nice to have in the cultural center. This is the Culture d'Avenir project. This is a project that we organize every year with the Pompidou Center and the HKW in Berlin. So it's 3 important European cities connected through 3 cultural institutions and 5 artists of each city that work together, like in a sort of an artistic Erasmus exchange program. And also a very important side of our work has to do with performances and dance, this idea of the body as embodying culture as a way of resisting to this digitalization, increasingly digitalization of our public sphere. And also this is music and kind of theater, yeah. So these are very, some of the examples of the kind of work that we do. Always, as I said, guided by these public sphere principles, no? The idea that everything that we do, it has this umbrella of trying to reinforce and promote the political principles embedded into the public sphere. So it's both a very rooted work, this idea of promoting utopia at the local level through the language of the symbolic and the imagination. Thank you.
So yeah, I'm going to speak then about figures of utopia, poetic tropologies, and communal topologies. By the way, Julian, I sent it by email, just in case you want to have the handout. So it's a bit about the relations between aesthetic or imaginative figuration habits and utopic configurations or utopic space. And I'm going to start with what you have just under that as a movement that will take us from utopia as critique to the critique of utopia, so that from utopia as interruption of facticity to the poetic figurations that are the conditions of possibility of utopic projections. I'll start then. In his demystifying drive of philosophical concepts, Nietzsche warns that when a new word is forged, while claiming to have made a discovery about the world, one has rather created a problem as well as an obstacle to its solution. The admonition seems to apply with particular pertinence to the invention of the word utopia, whose series of meanings over time, a work by Thomas More, the fictitious island described therein, an eclectic literary or philosophical genre, a project for a perfect or an unrealizable society, a compensation in the face of the limits of the real, a kind of intentional community, a voluntarist illusion, not to mention its assimilation to paradisiacal myths of origin, prophecies of the end of time, or sentimental fantasies. All these are woven into a bundle that calls for critical clarification, it being necessary to delineate both the effects of experience and the conditions of possibility of utopic projections. Thus, moving a bit down there, when it comes to the limiting the specificity and output of utopic discourses, one can start by observing that in the same gesture in which they are imaginatively project a more or less realizable socio-political and urban order, often a metaphysical conception that commands the whole, they question the current facticity. Regardless of whether or not their conception seems or turn out to be achievable, they have a disruptive effect on the inertia of the established representations of things and the normativity that govern human behavior in a given world. Such a critical output is already inscribed in the very conception of utopia that More coins from the Greek no place, as you know. So lack of place without place, making radical otherness as historical disruption the key to understanding his work. For irrespective of whether one assesses the utopian project represented in Book 2 as an exemplary model or as an ironic counterexample, more probably as an alternance between both, what is beyond doubt is it constitutes a radical critique of the de facto state of affairs in Europe and England as described in the anticlimactic Book 1, which was only later composed. As Francisco Quevedo, the Spanish writer, acutely knows in his preface to the first Spanish edition of Utopia in 1637, is what you have in quote 3 in page 2, but don't worry. This is Quevedo says, "He who says that we must do what no one does reproaches the entire world. Le hace un reproche a todo el mundo." In this same critical output, which makes of the explicit projection of otherness an implicit critique of the given order, that can be recognized all the way to contemporary utopic discourses, passing through the versions of late modernity, where utopia had ended up appearing at the core of the historical dialectics. Thus, one could recall the limitations such as those of Mannheim in the horizon of his opposition between ideology and utopia, where he defines the latter, this is quote 4, as an orientation that surpasses reality and at the same time breaks the bonds of the existing order. Or with an already more positive bent, those of Ernst Bloch, who in conversation with Adorno warns, this is quote 5, utopia is not an evasion into the unreal, it is an excavation to bring to light the objective possibilities innate in the real and to struggle for the realization. For even when taking as such a positive struggle for the objective possibilities in the real, as will be stressed from the critical perspective I'm going to adopt in a moment, what counts is not so much the imposition of a program to be evaluated according to the criteria of realpolitik, the feasibility of disciplined minds and bodies, geometric cities, lost islands, and so on. But rather, what counts is the imagination and socialization of a communal behavior. In other words, not so much the objectivation of a content shared as common knowledge, but a way of objectifying reality susceptible of finding social reciprocity, or becoming a new habit of synthesis able to reshape the common topos, the communal space. In this sense, as one shifts the critical attention from, this is the last point there, if one shifts the critical attention from the effects or outputs to the conditions of possibility of utopic conceptions, from their disruptions of facticity to the imaginative projections, it becomes necessary to discern much more than the explicit socio-political, urban, or metaphysical imaginaries intentionally staged by the narrative descriptions or articulated by the theoretical programs in different utopic versions. What it counts is really discerning more decisively the implicit habits of synthesis of the representations of the utopic that commands them. The very way a dominant habit, a figurative habit, a poetic habit, so a poetic tropology, projects characteristic utopic topologies at different levels, where its communal socialization defines the conditions of experience. Certainly, and this is like the counter-argument for the time being, to the extent that most utopic discourses present an individualized and detailed description of an ideal society or urban space, the first thing that strikes the eye are the empirical imaginaries. So like what you see. Taking the way these imaginaries had been staged, for instance, in modern utopia, think of 17th, 18th, 19th century utopia, one is struck by how, in the same gesture in which it shows itself to be anthropocentric, it appears as existentially totalitarian, making the good of the human being in general the subjugation of the individual. Or if I shift the focus to the physical topologies, one is assaulted by the pretension to situate and inhabit a world apart, cut off from the rest and closed off itself, as is reflected in the American geographies, the insular topographies, and the protective urbanisms. In terms of human behavior, in turn, modern utopias tend to impose programmatic imaginaries of socio-economic equality and communitarism, often ensured by strict legal regulations and labor mechanization. Finally, these modern topological orders and normativity of behaviors match a series of more immaterial imaginaries that point to ideal unity and dissolve otherness once the ideal order has been established, such as cultural identity, historical stasis, and a communicational transparency often associated with a perfected or even a perfect language that would communicate the real without remnants or errors. Without ever suspecting how a series of poetic habits discarded as accessories, through their spontaneous and socialized synthesis, operate beneath the surface as the formal conditions of possibility of these very utopian orders being staged. For more decisively, and this is what I want to stress, obviously, what can be critically discerned beneath this visible surface are specific figural habits that project such utopic configurations at different levels, giving them clear isomorphisms to one another. This obviously architects understand very well because they think in projective terms. You have a function that projects a certain space. Well, that's where I'm putting attention in also social behavior, metaphysics, and obviously the urban layout of utopian projects. So what one can and should interrogate and evaluate are the continuities between dominant poetic tropologies and characteristic utopic topologies, just as they are manifested at levels of human communal dwelling, such as the urban, the socio-political behavior, and the metaphysical construction, with a return effect over the assumptions about facticity. It is above all in this critical sense that utopic fiction can be considered as a non-place that gives place, not so much in the manner of the figure of a promise, but in the manner of the promise of a figure, of a new poetic way of organizing things that provides the formal conditions of possibility to synthesize in a new way the diverse topological levels that delimit human experience. For if human dwelling requires the constitution of a series of existential levels that make it possible to articulate and sustain oneself in the world, the interrogation of how the different utopic versions through history, the way they accentuate and link in language, projecting cuts and relations which organize reality, allows not only to recognize among these levels more or less palpable isomorphisms behind the variable material resistances they offer to the formal habits that organize impressions, but also allows to grasp the explicit, the dominant habits of order in a given place and time, insofar as they are dramatized, precisely they are dramatized in utopic projections, because they encounter much less material resistance than in actual projections in the communal space. This can be seen from the representations of the most immediate, for instance, the body, the way you represent your own body, or subjectivity, or the relation between both, to the representations of the most abstract, but equally indispensable topologies for existential sustenance, such as the metaphysical and the temporal levels, the way in which we answer the inevitable questions about the structure and the becoming of reality as a whole. Added to these, in between, and of particular importance for utopic configurations, are the ways in which the private habitation is conceived as a place of retreat associated with the needs of the individual body in the basic social nucleus, and above all, the ways in which the city is conceived, a public topology that weaves the urban layout and the socio-political behavior with its legal, economic, labor, mobilization, and other legalities, to which the interrogation of other levels can be added, such as that of technique, which extends from the objects at hand in individual existence to the modes of collective transformation of terrestrial space and beyond. Today we technologically intervene even space, or the broader topologies of landscape, geography, or the conception of the physical universe. It is in this same sense, then, I mean with attention to behavior rather than program in utopic versions, that the commonplace warning about the end of utopia that resounds all over the place today, not meaning here, I mean all over the world, forces one to consider not only a crisis in the socio-political or urban imaginaries and conceptions being programmatically staged, but also, and above all, a crisis in the creation and socialization of effective habits of figuration, common habits of figuration. A crisis in the imaginative capacity to generate new behaviors of symbolization susceptible of being sanctioned by an important social reciprocity when it comes to configuring a shared space. This, at least, is what I would like to suggest by opening this presentation very broadly to a very brief, obviously, historical examination that leads from classical utopic thought to the present one. I'm going to just move this up. So this last point you have there. For if one were to sketch, as I'm going to do now, a historical survey of some of the major figurative revolutions in utopian thought, where one focuses on how the transformation of a dominant poetic habit confronted time and again to the crisis of common representation, reshape those socio-political, urban, and metaphysical orders in a characteristic manner, one could follow, as I'm going to do very briefly, the way idealizing utopia was projected by classical metaphor or analogy, passing through the abyssal dystopia of modern irony and the revolutionary pantopia of 19th century infinity, to the way a kaleidoscopic paratopia is projected by contemporary montage, whose more recent crisis, I will argue, calls for a Babelic asyntopia, giving actuality to the figuration by translation. I have put in the handout, you have a lot of material, not a lot, but enough material and rubrics so that you can understand, if you decide to someday, some of the issues involved in the 5 historical scenes I'm going to sketch. But let me at least, as I said, sketch in each case the basic solidarity or isomorphism one finds between the dominant figural habits as embodied in an author, a culture, and a specific historical time on the one hand, and the characteristic socio-political, urban, and metaphysical utopic configurations on the other. Starting for what you have there as, what you have there, number 1, as starting with this idealizing utopia, classical metaphor in Plato's Republic. For classical utopian thought, of which Thomas More is directly tributary and finds its paradigmatic source in Plato's Republic, is born as an idealizing utopia projected by a metaphorical habit of figuration, where a discrete movement of similarity in difference among sensible images that is resolved in the unity of the idea projects a series of dualist topologies characteristic of ontological thought. In principle, the synthesis of analogical figuration in its classical use is well known, where the good metaphor is defined by Aristotle as the capacity to grasp similarity in difference. That is, as a link amid the dispersion of sensible images, where the discerned similarity in difference is projected as an idea in which the topological movement is resolved. So it's a discrete movement. As you have in quote 12 in page 4, but don't worry, this is Aristotle. For example, to say that an honest man is like a square, 2 images, is to make a metaphor. Both terms imply an idea of perfection, which is an intangible thing. It is this spontaneous habit of synthesis which is clearly dominant in Platonic discourse, forging Plato some of the most famous allegories of all times, that allows one to critically explain not only the emergence of the Socratic concept as the extraction of unity in multiplicity, but also, more radically, the projection of the proportional urban, the just socio-political, and the dualistic and hierarchical metaphysical orders that define the Platonic utopia. His ideal conception under the sovereignty of the good, where all these topologies respond to the topological pattern of Greek analogia, which is both proportion and analogy, so finding similarity in difference. First of all, then, in strictly spatial terms, and we have been speaking in those terms architecturally today, and it's what you're seeing there, which is Magnesia, the plan for Magnesia, analogy determines the urban configuration of Plato's utopia, where the model for the urban layout of the perfect city appears as an order of proportions, analogia, that is, as a search for similarity in difference in constructed space. This is something which Plato develops quite extensively in the Laws, for instance, and that's what you're seeing. I mean, this is a reconstruction, where the best possible city to be projected in the sensible world, Magnesia, appears topologically configured from a series of proportions, 1 to 2 to 3, which we are told in the work would have been also used by the demiurge to create the world, establishing a further isomorphism between the levels of the urban and the cosmic configurations. Now, the same can be said of Platonic socio-political order, which is completely governed by the notion of proportional justice. That is, as an order of proportion that consists in giving each one its due. It's not egalitarian like modern democracy. You give similarity and difference again. Finally, in metaphysical terms, it is not enough to notice that the structural isomorphism that exists between the relation between the literal and the figurative sense in metaphor and the relation between the sensible and the intelligible world in ontology. More precisely, one must notice how the very figural habit of this dominant analogical topology in Plato, with its movement that leads from and subordinates the dispersion of comparison between sensible images to the unity in the resulting idea, that's how metaphor works, that it directs the structuring and the projection of his metaphysical topology, where the dispersion of the multiplicity of the sensible becoming is referred by Plato as an image to the unity of the idea as a model, to the point that even time ends being conceived as a mobile image of eternity. Something, this time, which signaled the way in which these idealizing and dualistic metaphysics would eventually be diachronized as historical teleology, as the subjection of the periplum of the material world, think from Augustine to Hegel, to an ideal end, extracting now the uchronic from the utopic. Now, it is precisely this kind of teleological projection that enters into crisis when one gets to what you have there as abyssal dystopia, modern irony in Jonathan Swift's Gulliver Travels. For even, this is some further, but even if one can discern a sort of constitutive link between the instability of representation in modern utopic discourse and the stability of meaning in irony, figuratively speaking, when one gets to this scene, one is not dealing here with a simple inversion of meaning of classical irony, where one thing is said to signify the opposite or something incompatible, but with a form of modern reflexive irony as a constant promotion and subversion without capitalization, which leaves in a representational impasse. In this sense, if the parody of the utopic literary genre is announced from the very title of Swift's work, Travels into Several Remote Nations of the World, etc., it is not enough to notice how Swift subverts all the typical imaginaries on which modern utopia builds. The journey to remote isolated lands where an unheard-of exemplary order is meant to be found, the description of its rulers' political system, divisions into classes and professions, urban structure and relationship to surrounding territories, its language, knowledge, academies, laws, penal systems, its medicine, education, diet, funerary, and survival practices. More radically, one must notice how in his treatment of these questions, dramatizing the rift that separates reality from utopia, Swift turns once against the other in an endless reflexivity, strains the equally hated de facto reality and ideal utopia in an abyssal critical movement. Thus, at the level of the urban configuration, one has everything from the insistent parody of the insular model, something which finds in the floating island of Laputa a paroxysmal moment, to the irresolvable tension between the incompatible utopic layouts presented in the four travels, where already the two initial ones break all sense of proportion. So, I mean, the trips to Lilliput and to Brodignac, which function in a manner of inverted perspectives, embody in the modifications of scale the two forms of classical irony, the ironeia, where one pretends to be less of what one is, to impose oneself to the political adversary with humor and a quiet sense of superiority, and the alasoneia, where one pretends to be more than one is, amplifying gestures and behaviors to the point, to point out, the grotesqueness and ridiculousness of the details. But the problem is that already in the joint tension, they impose an instability where one often doesn't know what to think. For there is no way to emerge with a stable urban or socio-political order by affirmation or by negation, or by implication, from the experience of the four Gulliver Travels. All of which finds an isomorphism in the subversion of teleology by an eschatological reflexivity. If one of the originalities of analogical metaphysics in modern times is the massive way in which it is diachronized as history, I mean, I was saying from Augustine to Hegel, as an historical teleology which submits the material course to what would be an ideal end, Swift's subversion is activated both as a figurative level, but also at a plot level, where he deploys an incessant and irresolvable alternation between pretension of Gulliver and limits of reality. Now, moving forward, to the next scene. When it comes, this is so revolutionary Bantopia's 19th century Blanqui here in Paris. When it comes to making a virtue out of necessity, giving now a positive outcome to the open or infinite figuration, one can move to this scene, to the revolutionary Pantopia proposed in the second half of the 19th century by Auguste Blanqui in L'Éternité par les Astres and other of his writings, where figuration by infinitization give rise to a sui generis conception of permanent revolution as an atomic and radiating regrouping of liberated individualities. Maybe here it might be worth to look some of the quotes. Go to page 14 if you can. As Blanqui already sums up at an early stage, this is quote 57, Blanqui says, the finite does not exist. Only the infinite exists. L'infini seul existe. Everything is infinite. The individual, human being, plant, stone is infinite. Thus, in keeping with the style of his compulsive writing, quote 58, infinity is not circumscribed by the word. On ne pelote pas l'infini avec la parole. Necessity is the excuse for repetitions. In tone with this, I was saying, one discern a quite patent isomorphism between the revolutionary ways in which Blanqui configures a topology at the level of the universe, and L'Éternité par les Astres, and the real as a whole, on the one hand, and the way he configures a topology at the level of the city and urban revolutionary action on the other, which depend on this output of the figurations and habits of the infinite. It is such a figuration that already defines his pantopic revolution of the city layout, where against the kind of planification promoted by Haussmann, Blanqui, and that's why you're seeing the way to build a barricade and the way to build a fortress from any neighborhood in Paris, Blanqui projects then urban fortresses of insurrectionary action to bring about an order of barricades from a different and incessant transformation of a de facto city, to bring the invisible out of visible. All of which is described with the typical detail of utopian thought in works such as Instruction pour une prise d'armes and other of his writings. So look at just quote 60 before moving forward. This is how Blanqui describes the way of creating these fortresses out of the city, which are not permanent, are transitory fortresses. So he says, this is, as I said, quote 60, there are fortresses everywhere in Paris, hundreds, thousands, as many as the imagination can dream of. Fantasy or imagination creates them with the streets, as the tongue creates words with the letter of the alphabet. It is a manner of choosing at random or at whim, in any neighborhood, a perimeter formed by the series of streets, perimeters of all shapes, triangles, squares, rectangles, pentagons, hexagons, and so on. The exits of the streets that reach the perimeter are barricaded. That's the way to build a barricade. The streets along the contour of this front are occupied, and here is the fortress. After this perimeter, we choose others, concentric to the first, fortified in the same way, and here is a series of successive fortifications up to the last house in the center, which serves as a redoubt. The same infinite figuration defines the pantopic socio-political configuration as incessant revolution and permanent bifurcations, a social revolutionary body projected by Blanqui as a constant regrouping of individualities liberated by enlightenment. Finally, and this is more well known, this revolutionary pantopia finds its metaphysical version in a conception of an infinite universe as eternal revolution. Articulating the positive hypothesis that affirms extensive infinity by addition, so projecting a limitless space and time, and the negative hypothesis that denies intensive infinity by division, so propounding the idea of an endless, divisible, continuous matter, Blanqui projects in L'Éternité par les Astres a sui generis conception of eternal repetition, where the revolutionary imaginary continues to set the tone. Look at quote 82, which is further on the hand of some page there. He says, the renewal, is it 82, really? Well, whatever. just listen to it, the renewal of the worlds by the collision and volatilization of the dead stars take place every minute in the fields of infinity. Innumerable and rare at the same time are these gigantic conflagrations, depending on whether one considers the universe or a single one of its regions. What other means could supply there for the maintenance of general life? Now, and I'm moving towards the end, not the end, but towards the end. A more widespread way out of irony than this precise figuration by infinity in Blanqui is the kaleidoscopic paratopia of avant-garde montage, which I could illustrate with many works. I chose here The Wasteland, but I'm not going to speak about that. For if it is difficult to overestimate the extent to which the advent of montage has changed our habits of representation in the last 100 years, so the ways we feel, we think, we project a shared world, one must recall that in its initial developments in the arts and later adoption by theory, I mean in cubist painting and photomontage, in images and ideogrammatic poetry, the perspectivist novel, the new cinematographic language, and soon from architectural projection to urban reading, and finally historico-philosophical conceptualization. All these appeared as a direct response to the great crisis of experience, including the utopian representation of the city and of history, which had been dragging on since the end of the 19th century. That is, from the moment the post-industrial metropolis massified and exploded the topology of the traditional city, and above all, after the disasters of First World War, which call for a radical break with the analogical, teleological habits of representation incapable of making sense of the present. In literary terms, it is what finds an exemplary instance, among many others, and a massive socialization in the appearance of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, a poem which becomes conscious of its own formal device. You remember this phrase, "These fragments I've shored against my ruins," a device of montage that allows not only to generate a critical diagnosis of the chaotic panorama of post-war world, but also to project a new type of representational order as a juxtaposition of culturally and historically discontinuous scenes. A perspectivist fragmentation and paratactic juxtaposition with a more polyvalent and less intentional signification that gives place to a new urban, socio-political, and historical configuration. Already, the urban paratopia projected by montage, the dynamization of the image of the contemporary city, and you're seeing a bit of that there in the images, that could be found throughout the experimentation of, for instance, think of the perspective novel. So after Joyce Ulysses, you could include words such as Dos Passos, Manhattan Transfer, which is from 25, or Aragon's Les Paysans de Paris, or Breton's Nadja, or Dublin's Berlin Alexanderplatz, all novels that work the montage pattern to represent the city. But in strictly contemporaneous plastic terms, you could see these works of Citroën, who are from 1922 and 1925, which made an impression on the avant-garde circles at the time to represent the city as photomontage. Ultimately, as one gets to the way this perspectival fragmentation and this continuous juxtaposition reconfigures historical metaphysics, one ends with the projection of an interruptive topology, a sort of demand for transcendence in immanence, which would gain momentum throughout the 20th century, being largely responsible for the cult of the event in contemporary thought. For we are faced here, in these cases, with the shock effect produced by avant-garde artistic montage, that is, decades before its expectation of transcendence in immanence was domesticated by commercial assemblage, generating more recently the phantasmagoria of absolute spatio-temporal availability in the virtual topology displayed by digital technology, with the consequent collective anxiety in the face of an epiphany that does not happen, and calling for the reformulation of the utopic through new figures of experience. So to end, confronted with this crisis, and this has appeared already in other of the talks, And something happened here, went to the beginning. So to end confronted with this crisis, indeed, if one is faced with the phantasmagoria of the fulfilled utopia in which we live today, I mean, in this kind of non-place that has emerged in the oxymoron of the global village, as well as in virtual reality, which makes you to be nowhere and everywhere. When it comes to resuming with a double critical and projective output of the utopic, including effective ways of conjugating the antinomies that define contemporary inhabiting. I mean, antinomies such as freedom versus justice, mobility versus rootedness, individuation versus belonging, politics versus economy, development versus ecology, etc. Translation emerges as a decisive figuration, especially as one moves from what has been usually called the utopia of all literary translation, the impossibility of returning the foreign as the native, towards translation as utopia, that is, towards a poetic knowledge and experience that, along with accepting the a priori renunciation of the possession and control of the full meaning of the foreign, does not appear as the transfer of an identical meaning, but already synchronically is determined as the reception of foreign forms of behavior, an operation that, from a diachronic perspective, leads to the unfolding of a certain pending meaning of the past, where the consequences of this double movement of hospitality, I mean in space and in time, is the utopia of a language as a growing crossbreeding between tongues, a new model for the constitution of the subject, the community and culture, subtracting them from the identitarian and universalist imaginaries that had dominated traditional utopian thinking about language when it comes to ensuring kinship among human beings. This is what defines the translational urban layout, at least since the story of Babel that you have there, where the interruption of the tower constitute a double warning against the pretensions of constructive totalization and linguistic totalization. Thus, if we are confronted with a constructive interruption here that the iconography of each era has imagined in its own way, and you have there Kiefer and Bruegel, according to its technical constructive possibilities, the general interpretation shifts today from the alleged punishment to the actual prevention of the disaster of identitarian unity. This already foreshadows the way in which translational figuration completely redefines the socio-political, where the citizen and community appear projected from discontinuous realities and passage movements that weave a spatial and temporal fabric where there are neither easy transitions nor necessary consensual continuities, much the less the possibility of totalization. The irreducibility of the crossbreeding principle would make it impossible to think citizenship, sovereignty, territory as an homogeneous identity that could be delimited by the means of fixed borders. If in more metaphysical terms, one wants to continue or insist, if one wants to continue insisting that the human beings inhabit language, one would have to correct and say that the constitution of human being is unfolded together with the language, traversed by the foreign in the alleged most proper place. This, at least, would be the translational afterlife that the Babel story unfolds in our own times. For it goes without saying that it is this translational figuration or habit which holds foreign forms of signification, significant behaviors coming from abroad to produce their own effects, that has dictated the itinerary that I've made throughout some of the major figurative revolutions of utopic projections. A survey that I'm finishing that has led us from the way idealizing utopia is projected by classical metaphor, passing through the abyssal dystopia of modern irony and the revolutionary pantopia of 19th century infinity, to the way a kaleidoscopic paratopia is projected by contemporary montage, whose more recent crisis calls for this Babelic asyntopia, or figuration by translation. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you all. It's been a long day. Those were really fantastic presentations. So I'm going to open it up for questions. Everybody's tired, yeah. Moritz.
I've got it's on, yeah. A half-baked question. A half-baked question. It's not quite all there, and this really, I think it goes across all three presentations. I've got some more specific ones for Andres around the real and the possible, and the language engine in Gulliver's Travels, and how that kind of would impact on the idea of translation and assemblage that we see towards the end in your presentation. But the general question is really around the idea of intersectionality that kind of seems to emerge in each of your presentations, the idea of spaces of intersection. So I'm blending the concepts that produce a certain kind of public sphere that allow difference to encounter difference as difference, not as instances of the same, whether it's physical or metaphorical and linguistic. And I wondered, my question is really around Edelman's idea of queer theory as a way to kind of shift the integrity of the subject, which is always teleological, always for this future kind of arrival. And how architecture, how the configuring of social space, how the work of translation might each be thought through the idea of queering the subject.
Maybe we'll ask a couple. We'll have a couple people ask questions. I mean, I have a couple of questions. Let me find them. So, Julien, are you still there? Oh, you're there. I was looking on the top. I'm very tired. I'll ask this in English, but I can also say it in French. You said several times, and maybe this was just the translation from French to English, but I was interested that you said several times that your work is about revealing the common. You used the word revealing, and I wanted to hear more about that. Why, in what ways, as if the common is there and you're revealing it, like sculptors talking about, they're chipping away at a sculpture and actually they're just they're bringing to life something that is already there. Does that make sense as a question? Tu veux que je le dise en français?
I understood. Perhaps it's not really the right word, but yeah, I think you understood it right. I suppose that the common is already there, and that there is a need to make the possibility to reveal it. Reveal it is perhaps not the right word, but to have a space where it's possible to express those common. So I think we have people have many how to say needs and thoughts and in their body, in their mind, and And we need, it's like the example of where to meet people nowadays. Let's say before, perhaps we were meeting people at the church or wherever, but nowadays, where can we meet people? In a bar? We don't know, and it's becoming so difficult to meet people in a true way, and so we need to have those spaces where meeting is possible, for example. So when I presented the vanilla workers, this is, let's say, quite easy because they need machines that they could share, and so they all need those machines, and if they come together and all of them they put a little of money, they have the machine for everyone. So this is what I wanted to say by this word, revealing or materializing or making possible those thoughts, needs, this. So I'm not a philosophical, so I'm sure I don't have the right word,
No,
but
that's perfect.
yeah, it's bringing those comments in the material world.
Thank you. No, that was a great answer. I had a second question for Judith, and then maybe you can all answer Moritz's questions, and then Fiamma, you have a question?
No, I want to just ask to Judith one very stupid.
Okay.
You want me to wait?
Let me finish my question first. Okay, then you can go. Judith. Sorry, I just have to find it now. Yeah, so it was actually just a very simple question. When you're talking about public debate and always trying to enlarge the limits of what can be said, and I just wanted to know, I mean, do you ever have legal problems with that? I mean, what are the sort of, do you have pushback from officials or authorities or from the larger community? So, Fiamma.
Was not like such a... Okay, now I wanted to ask Judith one stupid question, but I'm curious, because when we were working in Tijuana with the different kind of communities, we had a lot of problems in the equivalent of your cultural center. There was a similar place there to have the different communities really communicating among them. You know, it seems very stupid, but it's not. It's like in San Francisco, we have the Chinese community, we have the Italian community, we have the Latinos community. They rarely really get together in the same place and interact a bit on a deeper sense than not just we're doing multiculturalism, you know what I mean? So I wanted to ask if in your case that was different.
So maybe answer that, and then the three of you can answer Moritz's question about queering space and so on.
Okay, thank you for this important question. Well, I mean, we never know the real impact of our symbolic kind of work, but as far as we can tell from our kind of daily contact with our communities and audiences, and we kind of benefit from the density of our city. The fact that, for instance, in our neighborhood, there are more than 70 nationalities co-living in the same space. So it hasn't become kind of the space of the Moroccans or the Pakistanis or the Bengalis, no? And one says that the experts say that the Raval has been a kind of a success story because it hasn't become the ghetto of any of these communities, no? So they are related, they are connected, they share a space, no? The fact that and that's the idea of the city, no? The city is a space where different should be, no? In theory, the space where different people meet and can, without losing their original differences, no? Without coexist without losing differences. So it is true that it's difficult to find this dialogue between communities, and I'm not talking only about cultural different communities, but also in terms of economic backgrounds, no? So all the work that we do is always aimed at provoking that dialogue and provoking this idea of a shared space, even if it's only symbolic, but this idea of at least acknowledging that you're sharing the space with people that are different to you, no? And that's increasingly difficult to happen in many of our cities that become privatized, gentrified. No? So we're losing kind of the common bond of public spaces. So for us, it's kind of our aim is to use culture and our cultural space as a public cultural space to create that physical, real community that is shared, but also kind of this imaginary and symbolic places, no? And sometimes people tell us that, oh, you should do that for your neighborhood, or this, with a bit of a condescendence, no? With this kind of this perspective. And we usually find that it's more useful for the upper classes to be in touch, no? With we're kind of more ghettoized than the communities in our neighborhood. So yeah. It's difficult to know the real impact, but we're trying to provoke that conversation. And in terms of the pressures that you were mentioning, I have to say that I have been at the head of the CCB for 5 years, and I've never encountered any kind of political pressure in terms of what we could discuss, what we could be deal with. That means a lot of responsibility for me and for my team, no, to be aware of the context in which we're working, no, not to do kind of the things that intellectually we think are important, but be aware of the conflicts or the tensions, of the divisions, or the really political important issues of your own context, local and global. So that means that we have to be very well connected. We like to use this expression, Hannah Arendt's expression of thinking in company, so that we're not kind of an intellectual space that works on our own, but we always are working in cooperation in a broader ecosystem. No? So that we work with universities, with researchers, with activists, with artists. No? It's a very, very open and porous space, and that also protects us in terms of political problems. No, I usually give the example of a very important exhibition that we did maybe 1 year or 2 years ago on Sade, the Marquise de Sade. In that particular moment, that it allowed us to talk about free speech, gender violence, no, and it was kind of a very, very risky project, no, in the contemporary context. And all my colleagues, all my European colleagues, would say, "You're crazy. You'll have to kind of step down, and this would be impossible in France. This would be impossible in the UK." And we did it with a lot of responsibility, and we did it by engaging a lot of feminist communities, queer communities, and it happened that Sade was kind of an inspiration for many of those communities. No, so we did it in a very responsible way, and maybe it was the last one. Maybe next year I won't be able to do that kind of exhibition. No, but we're always testing the limits, no, and trying to push up, no, knowing where we are and understanding that it is important to enlarge the topics on what we can discuss about.
Sorry, Julianne needs to be admitted.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. Oh, it's on the other one.
Yeah.
That's remarkable that you,
Yeah, maybe one day they call me and they say, you're fired. But so far, I have to say that, since we have this good response from the public, the media, it's kind of this fragile ecosystem, no, which is always a public sphere, no, and we know an extreme right is starting to become also powerful in Spain, and no, so we have to be very aware of. But we're very committed, and we know what we're doing, and and sometimes, for instance, the work that we do with the local immigration associations, the non-accompanied migrants, no, which is kind of undocumented, no. So it's we don't do it with a lot of visibility, no. So we're trying to play without a lot of sensitivity, you know. I think it has to do with, you know, don't take things for granted and not have a very clear idea of what we're doing, and at the same time be sensitive of the risk that we're putting those youngsters, for instance, no, at.
Yeah, well, I suppose I'll go back to your initial question. Well, I mean, you set like an horizon where your question was put to me precisely. I mean, which was the horizon of the relationship between the possible and language, and I would just clarify that by language, obviously, I don't mean a tongue or a natural language as the one I'm using now. It means any behavior, material behavior that is systematically significant. So where the variation in a sensible movement or a posture is systematically interpreted in a certain way. So that's a language. So I mean, from bacteria to what I'm doing now. So yeah, I'm not speaking only of natural languages. And then about your question of the spaces of intersection, where one can accept or host difference as difference. Yes, but the model of utopic asyntopia by translation that I'm defending is also a big awareness that that hosting or accepting difference as difference is partial, and you have to accept it's going to be partial, and it's going to be violent as well, because as it's going to be partial, you'll have to say yes here and no there, and that's what happens normally in the task of a translator. So translator implies both a mourning for not being able to host everything that is demanded, and also involves recovering a certain intentionality. I mean, compared to montage, for instance, artistic montage, I mean. So you have to make of the impossible a permanent decision, and that's intentional. You have to choose among options, knowing that if you choose one, you close the other door. You open this door to host something from difference from the foreign, and you're going to close other doors, because there's no way of hosting the whole demand of a foreign language, for instance. You have to you translate poetry, and you have to choose if you're going to privilege the images of the music or you're going to privilege like the irony. But you cannot do everything at the same time. And it's the same, and you could see it like in the presentations of both Judith and Julian, which I was very, very impressed with both of them. The amount of negotiation that is involved in every project. And that negotiation is an enormous recovery of intentionality compared to the utopic projections inspired in the 20th century by montage, where intentionality was meant to be suppressed. So the artist was meant to become a catalyzer that was just going to put things to speak by themselves. And then the theoretical montages, think of Benjamin in the passage. I mean, I have nothing to say. I only have put things together. I mean, the most you could say is that you're going to do like sort of a weak force compared to the strong force of old intentionality, where the artist was going to choose some things and put them, or the theoretical artist, as Benjamin does in the Passage project, and the effect was going to be on its own of the material, this fragmentation and juxtaposition. Whereas when you move to translation, you recover a strong intentionality, and that's a big difference. So I would say, yes, difference as difference, accepting and hosting difference and difference, or if you want to put it, accepting and hosting the foreign as the foreign, but in the awareness that there's no way you're not going to do violence, because you're not going to be able to respond to everything needed there, and that opening here is closing there, and that there's an enormous amount of negotiation in the good sense and in the bad sense. But negotiation always implies a little violence, because there's also, to the participants in the negotiation, there's always a certain amount of mourning. They have to, they need time. That's why they need 3 years sometimes to build a common house. Instead, I mean, that project, that fantastic project that Julian was speaking of, that took 3 years, and then half of the people left. Because those people couldn't do the mourning of time and the mourning of concessions, because this was done among many people. So there was a process. Some of them probably didn't have the time. Others didn't have the openness to host what was being agreed. And And that's violent, because, and then there's also this process of accepting defeat that it is implied in the asymptotic model of translative utopia. The last thing I'm going to say, that's why it's asymptotic, because it's never finished. It's a permanent process that, like an asymptote, it's always approaching the limit, but never touches it. So I would answer in such a way. I mean, the aim is to host difference at difference, but you always have to choose, knowing you're choosing among impossible alternatives. And you have to just make of the vacillation a decision. And that's, it's recovering a bit the existential pathos, which is obviously had been very, very, whatever, I mean, erased from the map of European philosophy in the last 50, 60 years.
I would just like to add to Andres's comments that as far as we are concerned, we embrace intersectionality and also queer culture as we understand them as a way of enlarging the limits of public sphere. No, it's like making more a more livable life for more people. No, in terms of. And at the same time, what we're trying to do is this effort of translation, no, in trying to constantly translate the concepts and the language of academia into for a larger public. No, I'm always kind of, one of my obsessions as director of the CCP is kind of for whom we're working. No, who are, I mean, what's the meaning of the things that we do, and I mean, why we're doing the things that we're doing, and for whom. No? And in this for whom, it has to do with this democratization, no? Or of access to knowledge. I'm always kind of obsessed in the use of language, the translation of complex concepts for a larger community. And I think that in that mediation process lies our kind of democratic or role, no? That fact that we're not only working for ourselves and for our own kind of sector, or be it academic or artistic, no? This idea of the same people talking about themselves and for themselves all the time, no? Which is kind of the easiest thing to do. So we lose, this idea of mourning that Andres was saying, no? That we lose purity, no, in the making. We lose kind of the limits of our borders, no. So our identity is a bit blurred, but that has also have to do with queer culture and with intersectionality, no. Like no one is pure, no, and no one is kind of. It has the borders are clear, no. But what I'm saying is this idea of the translation, no, and it's like using. The tool of translation understood as a universal tool to access and to the most of the people with in the benefit of the communication between the people. Yeah, I don't know if I'm sorry, my English is a bit crunchy today.
Yeah, thank you so much for this conversation and the especially the product. And I want to just follow up on something that you said, Judith, in response, I think, to Andres, which was why and for whom, in that space of intentionality, negotiation as always violent. I think you said, because people are more, they're giving something up in that. And so I guess I want to just bring, and this may be for a larger conversation, but this idea that this for who's mourning? Like if in the end it's always already still masculine, always already still white, always already still, we have to ask what's being given up, what's being negotiated. And I think that it seems like that's what you're bringing, Judith, in terms of this layering this question of why and for whom. So just wanted to put that there, and maybe we can contemplate later. But yeah, it's not really a question; it's a comment.
Yeah, I just want to precise, because maybe it was not completely understood. Before that, when I spoke about mourning, it was not about mourning our own identity. I was speaking about mourning the capacity to completely host difference, which is something you do in translation. You know that what comes from somewhere else, whatever your own identity, whatever it is, if you want to host it exactly how it is, it's not going to happen, because you will open doors, close up. There's no way you can I mean, any individual, even think in any personal relationship, love, you're never going to be able to respond to everything that is being explicitly or implicitly asked from you in a relationship. And there's a mourning also of your, so it's a kind of a narcissistic mourning, that you're not, I have to accept that I'm not going to be able, but I still have to choose, and I still have to do it. But it was not the idea of mourning your own identity. It was the idea of mourning your own capacities, but at the same time, you need to act anyway. I mean, it's impossible, like translation, like literary translation, but you do it. And actually, when you do it, things happen, and wonderful things can happen, or not. But I mean, you cannot avoid, the ethical problem. You cannot avoid the risk of any ethical act where you don't know exactly how it's going to come out. It can come out well, or it can not come out well. And if you pretend that you want to avoid that risk, probably you're going to be unable to deal with what's being asked with you. I mean, you might be unable anyway, but I think that the idea that you can resolve these kinds of demands of collective construction of the common without the risk of turning wrong, I think it's naive. I mean, if you really want to engage, that's what I was trying to stress.
I just want to say I did not misunderstand, and so it's a larger conversation.
I was thinking of it, you were saying that you have to mourn that your identity, and I was thinking more mourning your capacity to host.
I think that, I get that, yeah.
I was thinking about Judith, not about you.
Okay. Well, it's the same thing. I mean, I think I referenced Judith, but I think that we're in agreement in terms of sort of what's at the foundation of the negotiation, the intention. I mean, I think it's a provocative idea, right? In terms of, it's a utopic idea of creating the capacity for thinking otherwise, for something. So I understand that. It's just that this idea of asking for whom, anytime you start thinking about intentionality, that to me, that underlying that question is why and for whom. It already presupposes that, I think. But anyway, I'd like to talk more about it. And maybe you have to. Yeah.
For whom and with whom? No? Yes. It's not only like as for you, but it's this idea of concertation, no? Act in concertation.
Which I just, it's implicit in what we're saying, but that's at the heart of Julien's approach to architectural projects, which I just find so incredibly impressive. The amount of time that you take to work with local communities to find out what they want. Even the Bastille one example, you were talking about those 2 years, and I thought that was the project, and then I realized, no, that was the pre-project, because you were just trying to find out, what the needs were. And then you went and designed something. And I think that's really remarkable and commendable. And yeah, very much what we're talking about. Does anybody want to say anything else, a comment? Okay. You speak because for the recording.
No, I wanted just to say that the melancholia for not being capable of hosting the other, Andres, it doesn't start with the language. Even before the translation, don't we mourn already the incapacity of any language of really hosting what we are? to be in the word, to put it in words. You know what I mean? We're talking about translation, but even before, no? Derrida talks about the incapacity of language to really host existence as we are born. No?
Yeah. As I was saying,
we may need a whiskey for this conversation, but
yeah.
I mean, you know.
As I was saying to Maurice at the beginning of my answer, I don't understand by language natural language. I understand any significant behavior. So yeah, I agree with you. I mean, natural language can have difficulties of hosting or of translating our other languages. Like we were talking about before with your film about somatic, for instance, somatic language. I spoke about bacteria, meaning I did it on purpose to say something very, very basic life. But it is able to relate to its own traces and create meaning by doing that. So a bacteria moves. I have a friend that is a biologist, works here in Curie, and they said, like, the English, they do, like, experiments, and they want to go somewhere. Here they do, like, weird things, like they put bacteria to run, like horses. And they do things, but they relate to their own traces. And that's the emergence of meaning, because they are able to relate to a material way, to a material trace in a way that is significant. So yeah, I agree with that. I would just add, I mean, to your comment, that maybe melancholia is not the only way of mourning. There are many ways of mourning. I mean, melancholia is one, of course, and it's a big one. Actually, melancholia, in technical terms, is the inability to mourn. I mean, according to Freud. I mean, basically, if you cannot mourn and you repress mourning, you become melancholic. I mean, if you do mourning, you're right. So melancholia is a way of mourning, but it's not necessarily the only way of mourning. And I mean, technically, in psychoanalysis, it would be exactly a failure. I mean, like a way of mourning. But just that, I would say, I'm not actually advocating a sort of festive mourning. It is a possibility as well, but I was not also advocating that. I just want to make it clear.
Okay, and anybody else? Julien, je veux dire quelque chose? No, okay. Wow, well, thank you. That was an amazing panel, an amazing first day, and you know, we can continue conversation over drinks, and we can certainly continue conversation tomorrow. I hope you'll all come back in the morning and join us also in the afternoon for our visit to the CSP. So thank you, everybody.